Not everything that makes you stop is fear, and not everything that makes you anxious is wrong. There is something you have done many times, but you did not realize it. You hear something inside, not loud, not forcing, just not letting you move forward. But instead of listening, you call it, "I'm scared, I'm overthinking, I need to be stronger." And you continue. You push yourself forward. You try to overcome that feeling. But what you don't realize is, maybe that is not fear. Maybe that is the only time God is trying to stop you before you step into something you will not be able to return from. But because you cannot tell the difference, you did the most dangerous thing. You called God's voice fear, and you kept going. And now you are no longer sure. Not sure whether you were wrong or you missed it. Not sure whether that feeling was a warning or just weakness. So I ask you one thing, not for you to answer immediately, but so you cannot ignore it. How many times have you stepped past something very subtle just because it was not clear enough for you to believe it was God? I have called God's voice fear, not once, but many times. And every time I thought I was doing the right thing. I remember very clearly a period I stood before a decision. Not a small decision, the kind that if I stepped into it, my life would go in a completely different direction. Everything looked very reasonable, a good opportunity. People around me supported it. There was no obvious sign of anything wrong. But inside me, there was something very subtle, but it would not let me move forward. It was not fear, like panic, not uncontrollable anxiety. It was not loud. It just did not give me the feeling to go. And I hated that feeling, because it had no reason. I could not explain it to anyone. If someone asked, "Why don't you choose?" I had no clear answer. And that was when I started doing what I always do when I don't understand. I analyze. I wrote down all the reasons to go. I weighed the benefits. I compared the risks. Everything pointed in one direction. This is the right choice. But inside, that feeling was still there. Not bigger, not smaller, just there. And I started naming it. I told myself, I'm just scared. I lack confidence. I need to be stronger. Sound familiar? I turned something I did not understand into something I could control. I called it fear, so I could overcome it. And I did exactly that. I forced myself to move forward. Not because I had peace, but because I did not want to be seen as weak. The moment I decided, everything around me said, "You did the right thing." But inside me, there was something completely silent. No more subtle feeling, no more clarity. Only a kind of emptiness that was hard to explain. In the days after, I started to feel tired. Not physically tired, but tired on the inside. I still worked, still talked, still lived normally. But there was something I no longer felt connected. I prayed, but the prayers no longer reached. I spoke, but no longer felt heard. And I began to ask, am I doing something wrong? But I did not go back on that decision, because I had already chosen, because I had already told people, because I did not want to admit that I might have been wrong. So I continued. I tried to adapt. I tried to make it become right. But the more I tried, the more I realized one thing. This was not confirmed from within. It was not immediate failure. Nothing clearly collapsed. But day by day, I lost something I did not notice at first. Peace. And when you lose that, everything else, no matter how right it seems, is no longer enough. I remember one evening, I sat alone. No one there, no noise. And this time, I did not analyze anymore, did not explain anymore. I just sat there and felt. And for the first time, I did not call it fear. I just asked one question. Is this really fear? And in that silence, I realized something I had avoided for so long. It was never fear. Real fear is loud, chaotic, forces you to react immediately. But what I felt was different. It was subtle, clear, not forcing. It did not make me panic. It just did not give me peace to move forward. And at that moment, everything connected. I did not overcome fear. I stepped past guidance. And the most painful thing was not that I chose wrong, but that I had heard it, and I did not believe. Are you there right now? A place where you feel something is not right, but you cannot name it. And instead of stopping, you tell yourself, it's just fear, and you keep going. I don't know what you're facing, but I know one thing. That feeling is not random, and if you keep calling it the wrong name, you will keep going in the wrong direction while you think you are getting stronger. So before you go, pause for a moment. Not to decide, but to listen again to what you once ignored. There was a man. His name was Michael, years old. He had a stable job, a career path many people dream of. Everything from the outside looked right. And that was exactly the problem. Michael did not lack opportunities. On the contrary, he had just received an offer he had been waiting for many years. A higher salary, a better position, a clear step forward. Everyone around him said, "This is the moment. You can't miss this opportunity." And he thought so too. Logically, there was no reason to refuse, but there was one thing that no one saw. Every time Michael thought about accepting, he felt uncomfortable. Not the usual kind of anxiety, not fear of failure. It was like a pause, a silence. Something that would not let him fully move forward. At first, he called it pressure. He thought, this is a big step, so it's normal to feel scared. It sounded reasonable, and he accepted that explanation. But the strange thing was, that feeling was not like before. The times he was truly afraid, his mind was noisy. A lot of thoughts, a lot of scenarios, but this time there was no noise. There was only a very clear silence, as if everything inside him was saying, "Don't rush." But because it was not loud, he did not believe it. Michael started doing what he always did when he was unsure. He looked for reasons to continue. He wrote down a list of benefits. He asked friends for advice. He talked to his family. Everyone agreed. You should go. And every time he heard that, he felt a little more at ease, but only a little, because when he was alone, that feeling came back. Unchanged, not disappearing, just there. One evening, Michael sat in the living room. No TV, no phone. Just him and the silence. And for the first time, he did not try to escape it. He sat still, and he realized something very strange. That feeling was not pulling him backward. It just would not let him move forward. No force, no threat, just no confirmation. But instead of listening, he told himself, this is fear. And once you call it fear, you know what you have to do. You push through it. Michael accepted the offer. In the first days, everything was fine. He started the new job. Everything was as expected. No major problems, no immediate failure. But inside, something was no longer the same. He did not feel light, did not feel right, just empty. He tried to adapt. He worked harder. He told himself, things will be fine. But the more he tried, the clearer that feeling became. It was not fear, because if it were fear, it would have been louder. But this remained the same. Subtle, clear, unchanging. One day, Michael realized something that made him stop. He remembered the moment before the decision. The moment he had felt a very subtle pause. And for the first time, he did not call it fear anymore. He called it by its true name. I was warned. Not a loud warning, not through obvious signs, but through a lack of confirmation. And that had been there from the beginning. He just did not believe it. He thought God had to speak more clearly, had to be more certain, had to leave no room for doubt. But God does not do that. He does not force. He simply does not give you peace when you are going in the wrong direction. And if you do not recognize that, you will do what Michael did. You call guidance fear, and you keep going. Where are you in this story? Are you before the decision, or have you already stepped past it? Because there is something Michael took a long time to understand. Not everything that makes you uncomfortable is something you need to overcome. Sometimes that is the very thing trying to hold you back. And if you ignore it, you will not just lose a decision. You will lose guidance. At this point, you may still have a question in your mind. How do I know for sure that it is God's voice or just fear? I understand that question because I was stuck there for a long time. Not because I could not hear, but because I did not trust the way God speaks. I thought, if it was God, it had to be clearer, had to be more certain, had to leave me without doubt. But the truth is, God does not speak in a way you can control. He does not make you 100% sure and then go. He leaves a space, a silence, a feeling that you have to choose to trust or ignore. And right there, you begin to misname it. You call guidance fear. You call warning overthinking. You call the pause weakness. So I will not speak vaguely anymore. I will be clear. Not so you understand more, but so you cannot keep confusing it. This is how you distinguish, not by theory, but by the quality of what you are feeling. Sign 1. Fear is loud. God's voice is quiet but clear. I used to think, if it was God, I would know immediately. Clear. No doubt. No need to think. But that never happened. Instead, what I received was always very subtle. Not a loud voice, not a strong emotion, just a very quiet sense of something is off. Do you know that feeling? Nothing obviously wrong, no danger, no specific reason. But inside you, there is a pause, and because it is not loud, you do not trust it. You are used to thinking, if it is a signal, it must be strong, must be clear, must be impossible to ignore. But real fear is loud. It keeps talking. It creates scenarios. It makes you imagine hundreds of possibilities. You cannot sit still when you are afraid. You have to do something. You have to react. You have to escape. But what comes from God does not make you panic. It does not make you run. It just does not let you move forward with peace. And the dangerous part is you are used to noise. So you start to believe what is loud is real. What is subtle is not trustworthy. But in reality, it is the opposite. I once ignored a very clear silence just because it was not strong enough for me to trust. And after that, I had to live with the consequences of a decision I could have avoided. So let me ask you one thing. What you are feeling, is it loud or is it quiet but clear? Because if it is quiet and still there maybe, that is not fear. Sign 2. Fear pressures you to react. God's voice gives you space to choose. There is something very subtle that I did not realize for a long time. Fear is always urgent. It does not give you time. It says, do it now. Decide. If not, you will lose it. It creates pressure. Not with force, but with urgency. And when you are in that state, you stop listening. You just react. I have made many decisions not because I was certain, but because I could not stand the feeling of waiting. But what comes from God is not like that. It does not force you. It does not push you. It does not make you act immediately. On the contrary, it gives you space to pause, space to think, space to listen. And the strange thing is, because it does not force, you easily ignore it. You think, if it is important, it should be stronger. But God does not compete for your attention. He does not interrupt. He does not force you to listen. He simply is there. And you can choose to listen or to ignore. I once ignored it just because it was too free. No one forced me to stop. Nothing required me to change. So I continued, until I realized that freedom was the test. You are not forced to obey. You are invited. So ask yourself, what you are feeling, is it pushing you or is it giving you a choice? Because if it is not forcing, but still there, maybe that is not fear. Sign 3. Fear makes you panic. God's voice makes you pause. There is a difference you only recognize when you truly stop. Fear makes you lose control. You think faster. Your heart beats faster. You cannot sit still. You want to fix it immediately. You want to escape immediately. You want to do something to end that feeling. But what comes from God does the opposite. It does not make you run. It makes you stop, not because you cannot move, but because you are no longer allowed to move forward with peace. I remember one time I was about to say yes to a decision. Everything was ready, but right before that moment I felt a pause. No voice, no reason. Just I could not take one more step forward fully, and I did what I always do. I forced myself to push through it, but later I realized that was not weakness. That was a pause placed at the right moment. Fear makes you panic, but God's voice slows you down. And if you are not used to stopping, you will always think, I am being held back, when in reality, you are being protected. So next time you feel you cannot move forward with peace, do not rush to call it weakness. Ask yourself, is this the first time I am truly being asked to stop? Because if you ignore that pause, you will not realize you have gone too far until you can no longer return. Sign 4. Fear keeps changing, God's voice does not. There is something I did not realize until I looked back at my whole journey. Fear is unstable. Today you fear one thing, tomorrow you fear another. Today you worry about missing an opportunity. Tomorrow you worry about failure. It always changes. It always tries to keep you in a state of unrest. But what comes from God is not like that. It does not change. I once had a feeling, very subtle, but it kept coming back. Not stronger, not clearer, just there, day after day. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, it will pass. But it did not. I changed my environment. I changed my thoughts. I changed my perspective. But that feeling was still there. And that was when I began to understand something. Fear changes to keep you, but God's voice stays the same to guide you. Fear needs you to react constantly. It needs your energy. It needs your attention. But God's voice does not need that. It does not try to convince you. It simply stays there until you are willing to face it. And if you look back, you may see there is something that has been there for a long time, not disappearing, not changing. You just keep changing what you call it. Sometimes you call it anxiety, sometimes you call it doubt, sometimes you call it lack of confidence. But in reality, its nature has never changed. Only you have been trying to change your interpretation so you would not have to face it. So be honest with yourself once. Is there something in you that has not changed, even though you have tried to ignore it for so long? Because if it is still there, not bigger, not smaller, maybe that is not fear. Sign 5. Fear speaks with reasons. God's voice does not need reasons. I used to believe that if something was right, I had to understand why it was right. I needed reasons. I needed logic. I needed evidence. And if I could not explain it, I would not believe it. But that was also how I missed many times. Fear is very good at explaining. It gives you reasonable arguments. If you do this, you might fail. If you go that way, you might lose everything. It is logical. It sounds smart, and because it makes sense, you believe it. But God's voice does not always work that way. There are times you have no reason. You only have a realization, a very clear feeling, but you cannot explain it. You know it is right. But if someone asks why, you have no answer. And that is when you start to doubt. You think, if I cannot explain it, then it is probably not from God. But the truth is, God does not need to convince your logic to guide you in the right direction. He does not argue with you. He does not present evidence. He simply places a clarity inside you. And you have to choose, to trust or not. I once rejected a path just because I could not explain why I should take it. And I chose another path just because it was more logical. But later I realized logic is not always right, and that feeling without reason was actually the most right. So ask yourself one question. What are you believing just because it makes sense? And what are you ignoring just because you cannot explain it? Because if you need reasons to believe, you will always choose safety. But if you learn to recognize, you will begin to see there are things that are right without needing a reason. Sign 6. Fear keeps you in your comfort zone. God's voice leads you out, but with peace. This is where I was most confused. I thought, if it is from God, it should feel easy. No pressure, no difficulty, no fear. But reality is not like that. There were times God led me to places I did not want to go, unfamiliar, uncertain, out of control. But strangely, even though it was uncomfortable, I still had one thing: peace, not a comfortable feeling, but a sense of rightness. I did not understand everything. I did not see the future clearly. But I knew I was going in the right direction. On the other hand, there were times I stayed in my comfort zone. Everything familiar, everything stable, no major risks. But I had no peace. And that was what confused me the most. Why, in a safe place, was there no peace? Until I understood, safe does not mean right. Fear keeps you in what is familiar, because it wants you not to change. But God does not care whether you are comfortable or not. He cares whether you are going in the right direction. And sometimes the right direction is a place you have never been. So if you are in a place that is very safe, very familiar, very stable, but you have no peace, stop. Because maybe you are not stuck because of fear, but because you are in the wrong place. Sign 7. You keep calling it fear so you can ignore it. This is the sign I did not want to admit the most, because it is no longer about recognition, it is about honesty. There were moments I knew very clearly. No more doubt, no more confusion. I knew I should not move forward, but I still wanted to. And when you want something but inside you know it is not right, what do? You do not stop. You find a way to rename that feeling. I told myself, that is just fear. Because if it is fear, I can overcome it. But if it is God's voice, I would have to stop. And I did not want to stop. So I chose the easier way. Call it the wrong name, so I would not have to change. Are you doing that? You are not sure, but you keep calling it fear. Not because you believe it, but because you need it to be that. Because otherwise, you would have to face something else. You are being guided, but you do not want to listen. And that is the most dangerous point. It is not that you cannot hear. It is that you deliberately misname it, so you do not have to obey. So I will not ask you, is that God's voice? I ask you, are you calling it fear just so you can keep going the same way? Because if the answer is yes, then the problem is no longer discernment. It is whether you are willing to obey or not. All right, now you cannot say you do not know anymore. You have heard, you have recognized, you have seen yourself in it. The question is no longer, is that God's voice? But what will you do with what you now know? I will be direct, not soft, not comfortable. Because there are truths, if spoken softly, you will keep ignoring them. You are not stuck because you do not understand. You are stuck because you do not want to change. You have known for a long time, but you stayed. You stayed in that relationship. You stayed on that path. You kept saying it will probably be fine, while inside you no longer had peace. Why? Because you are afraid. Not the fear you call fear, but real fear. Fear of losing, fear of emptiness, fear of starting over. So you do something very subtle. You call God's voice fear, so you do not have to obey. Does that hurt? But be honest, you have done it. You stood before something very clear, but you said, "I'm probably just overthinking." You felt a pause, but you said, "I need to be stronger." You lost peace, but you said, "Everyone goes through this." You do not lack signs. You just keep renaming them so you do not have to change. And the most dangerous part is, you are getting better at it. Each time you ignore it, the next time becomes easier. Each time you misname it, you believe it faster. Until one day, you can no longer tell the difference. You no longer know what is God's voice. What is your voice? And you call that confusion. But in reality, that is the result of ignoring it too many times. I am not saying this to scare you. I am saying this because you are still here. And if you are still here, it means there is a part of you still listening. But you cannot stay in the middle forever. You cannot both listen and ignore. You cannot both recognize and keep going the same way. There will come a point you have to choose, not between easy or hard, but between continue controlling or start trusting. What does continuing to control mean? It means you only move when you understand everything. Only move when you are certain. Only move when you are no longer afraid. It sounds reasonable, but that is not faith. That is delay in disguise. And what does trusting mean? It means you move, even without all the answers. It means you stop, even without a clear reason. It means you let go, even without seeing what is ahead. And that is where you are standing right now. You do not need more signs. You do not need more videos. You do not need more advice. You already have it. You are just delaying facing it. So I ask you, not for you to answer me, but so you cannot keep hiding. Will you keep calling it fear, or will you call it by its true name and change? Because when you name it correctly, everything will change. Not because the situation changes, but because you can no longer keep going the wrong way once you know you are being guided back. And if you still choose to stay, at least be honest. Do not say, "I don't know." Say, "I know, but I am not ready." And that is where truth begins, but also where you cannot stay forever, because God does not force you. But He also does not change the truth just because you are not ready. So what will you do with what you just realized? All right, do not rush away. Do not turn it off. Do not go back to noise. Do not make yourself busy to forget this feeling. Just stay a little longer. I know what you just faced is not light. Not the kind of learning something new, but being touched in something you have avoided for a long time. And maybe, right now, you do not know what to do next. Not sure whether to move or stop. Not sure if you have the courage. But hear this slowly. You do not have to fix everything right now. You do not need a perfect plan. You do not need to know where the next step leads. You only need to do one very small thing, but very real. Stop calling the wrong name for what you are feeling. That is the first step. Not change, not decision, just honesty. This is not fear. When you can say that, something inside you will change. Not loudly, not suddenly, but very clearly. You will begin to feel again the peace you ignored, not because circumstances changed, but because you stopped resisting it. You are not wrong for being mistaken. You are not weak for being afraid. You are not a failure for going the wrong way. You just have not learned how to listen yet. And God is not standing there to condemn you for that. He does not say, "You have missed too many times." He does not remind you of your mistakes. He simply is there, still speaking, still guiding, still waiting. Not waiting for you to be perfect, but waiting for you to stop long enough to listen. And if you are here, that means you've already started listening. Not perfectly, but enough to return. If you want, pray with me. No need to be loud, no need for perfect words. Just be real. Lord, I was wrong. I called what came from you, fear. I ignored the times you tried to stop me, not because I could not hear, but because I did not want to stop. But today, I do not want to continue like that anymore. If this is from you, give me the courage to listen. I do not need to understand everything. I do not need to be certain. I just do not want to keep stepping over your voice. Teach me to discern, not by logic, but by your peace. And if I need to stop, do not let me be afraid of that pause, because I know your silence is not to lead me astray, but to keep me from going the wrong way. Amen. If you just prayed that, do not keep it to yourself. Write down one sentence, not for me, but for yourself. I choose to listen. Not as a phrase, but as a decision. And if you are on this journey, learning to discern, learning to pause, you are not alone. You can stay here on the God Heals prayer channel, not to gain more knowledge, but to be reminded of what you already know, but easily forget when life gets noisy. Here, you do not need to pretend to be strong. No need to be certain. No need to be perfect. You just need to stay long enough for peace to return. And maybe this is not your ending, but the first time you truly begin to listen.